So in this presentation, I'll be going over how to use the reporter module in Evergreen. The reporter is feared and loathed by many Evergreen users, but once you get a hold of what is and isn't possible in the reporter, it can become a powerful tool to interact with the NC Cardinal database. My goal with this presentation is to get viewers to not only run reports, but also become confident enough to modify templates for their own purposes. This training session will be broken down into 4 chapters. In the first chapter, we'll go over the basics of the reporter and where your reports, templates, and output will be stored. Next, we'll go over how to pull down a template, run a report, and check the output. After that, we'll go over how to make some basic edits to templates to get better results. Lastly, we'll try to demystify a couple of the advanced features of the reporter that give users a hard time. One of the biggest barriers to understanding the reporter is the large list of technical and vocabulary terms that a user needs to learn. Rather than define all the terms at once and give y'all information overload, we'll return to this slide throughout the presentation as we learn new terms. Let's start off with the basics. What is the reporter and what does it do? Evergreen stores everything it knows, like patron data, your item catalog, setup of your library branches, etc., in what's called a database. NC Cardinal staff use a language called SQL to talk to the database and get information out of it. We call these bits of SQL that we write queries. The reporter module gives staff the ability to talk to the database in a user-friendly way. The user interface of the reporter module takes your input and transforms it into a SQL query that can return all sorts of different types of data. It can't do everything that we administrators can do, but it's a powerful tool nonetheless. Once the building blocks of a SQL query have been created, the reports can be run with different parameters, including running them at recurring intervals and sending them to an email address after completion. When you bring up the reporter, you're greeted with a look at your folders. Folders are the areas where the reporter stores your data. There are 3 different types of folders: template folders, report folders, and output folders. Let's navigate into each type of folder and talk about the data they store. The first type of folder is a template folder. Think of templates as the building blocks of a report. A template tells the database what data you need, how you want to get the data, and how you want the data to show up in your report. The next type of folder is a report folder. Reports are the parameters that you give Evergreen for it to give you back data. In a report, you define which template you want to use, the folder for the output to go into, your recurrence settings, and custom inputs for the template's filters. The next type of folder is an output folder. Output is the data Evergreen returns from the database when it runs the template configured by your report. When you view the output, your web browser will create a pop-up to show your data. If your data set is small enough, Evergreen will generate a chart and table for it. You can also grab an Excel sheet from this pop-up. On any type of folder, you can select from a number of options to modify them. The Manage Folder tab provides the ability to rename, delete, and share the folder. Shared folders can be accessed by other users that have reporting permissions. When we create templates or run reports for you, we'll drop them into shared folders. In addition to their typical data, any type of folder can hold other folders of the same type, letting you organize your data into a folder hierarchy. In this chapter, we learned about folders, templates, reports, and output. Let's go over what you'll be using the reports module for the most: running reports. The basis of any report is its template. As we learned earlier, templates are the building blocks for a data request. They tell Evergreen what pieces of data you want in your report and how to format them. We've built up a huge library of report templates that you can browse through or search. We've got templates for acquisitions, billings, payments, cataloging, circulation, holds, non-catalog circs, inventory, items, and patrons. If you can't find a template that works for what you need, please place a request for a new template through ncardinalsupport.org.
So sort of the first step of familiarity with all of this is being able to take one of those templates that we drop into that folder, clone it into the folder where you want it to sort of live and run, and then create a report that just says I want the Miriam Lamb, I want holiday, like where you just basically put in the criteria and run it. That's the way that we typically do that.
So that's right. We'd prefer you not run reports directly off of our centralized report templates. I'll run y'all through the process of cloning that template into your folder. I've checked the box of the template that I want to run. It's called Count Circs by call number and date, and I selected Clone Selected Template from the dropdown. So we'll hit Submit to continue. On the next page, select your folder from the list to clone the template into it. You'll be greeted with this page that lets you edit every aspect of the template. Your typical use of the reporter won't involve much work with this interface, so we'll go over that last. For right now, all you need to know is that you can modify the name of the template to give it something more suited to your use case. To create a report, navigate to your folder, select your freshly cloned template, select Create a New Report from Selected Template, and hit Submit. From this point, we'll be setting up the parameters for our new report. A few of these are mandatory, and the module will yell at you if you try to proceed without them. First off, you'll need to give your report a name. This name will be used for the output as well, so make sure it's something descriptive. The next thing you'll need to do is set up a report folder. As I mentioned earlier, this report folder only holds the parameters for a report, not the actual output. Next, we'll set up the filters for our report. Filters will remove rows of data from the report output if they do not match certain criteria. This criteria can be created by the template's developer, but more often than not, the filters are left blank so that users like you can fill them in later. The first column tells you the name of the field being filtered and which source of data it belongs to. For instance, the second row is filtering on the checkout date from the circulation. The second column tells you the transform. Transforms alter how Evergreen interacts with and displays your data. Most commonly, you'll see the transforms say raw data, meaning that no changes will be made. For timestamps, there are many transforms that can extract particular date pieces. For instance, this second row is being formatted as a date. That means that the time of day is cut out from the original piece of data. There are other transforms for timestamps such as time of day, month name, and day name, but we'll go over these in greater detail when we go over creating report templates. The third column is the action. Actions are also known as operators. Actions are how your filter is applied to the dataset. It defines the type of comparison that will be made between your data and the filter. I'll go into the details of the actions in this report to give y'all an idea of what they can do. The enlist action is one of the most common actions that you'll see in our report. With this action, a row will be filtered out unless it exactly matches one of the entries in your list. This action appears in almost every report as a way to filter which library branches show up. Select the items from the select box and hit Add to make them entries in your list. If you add one by mistake, select it from the bottom box and hit Del to remove it. Another common action you'll see is the between action. This type of action is for numeric columns and will filter out rows unless the value is within a range that you specify. We most commonly use this to filter dates within date ranges. This type of filter will also let you use relative dates. For example, we have this set up to filter dates between 5 and 50 days before the report is run. The most straightforward of the actions is the equals action. This action can apply to any data type and will filter out all rows that do not exactly equal the filter value in that column. For text columns, this is case sensitive, so be sure to type in exactly what you're looking for. You'll very frequently see this action in reports in combination with the isDeleted flag. This flag requires a bit of explanation. In Evergreen, data is never actually deleted. It's just flagged as deleted and will not show up in regular use. With this filter, the F stands for false. That way, we only allow rows where deleted is false. Next, let's go over the third and final section of putting together a report. This section handles the output of the report. The output options here should typically remain unchanged. The Excel output will package your output for use with Microsoft Office. CSV stands for comma-separated value. This can also be used with Microsoft Office. The HTML output will generate a nice looking bar chart and table for you. but only if you're working with a smaller data set. We recommend using the Excel output. Next are the recurring options. A recurring report is one that will run over and over again at a specified interval. Many systems have reports running on a monthly basis. To make your report recurring, you need to check the recurring report box and select your recurrence interview. Instead of running the report as soon as possible, you might find it useful to run the report on the first day of the month. That means that it'll always run on the first day of the month going forward. One important thing to remember with your recurring reports is that if your template uses dates, you'll want to use relative dates instead of absolute dates, like 30 days ago instead of October 1st, 2021. The latter would produce the same report every month. When your report is complete, you can automatically have the output emailed to yourself and others by adding your email address to the send completion notification to email address. To add additional email addresses, separate them using commas. This email will contain a link to a password-protected report output. The last setting on this page is the output folder. This is where your spreadsheet will be stored if the report runs successfully. When you hit Save Report, you'll see this message at the top of your screen if everything worked out, or an error message if your setup was incorrect. Once the report is done, it'll output into the folder you specified. To view the output, navigate into your folder, click the checkbox next to the name of your report, and click the Submit button next to the View Report Output option in that dropdown. The output will show up in a pop-up window. The first thing you'll see is the HTML output of your report. But like I mentioned earlier, this will only be able to generate if you have a small number of rows. But it can be useful just to tell at a glance whether your report worked. The first option, tabular output, lets you view your data as a table in your browser, but it has the same limitations as the HTML view. The Excel output tab will automatically export the data as an Excel spreadsheet. Unfortunately, it gives the file a generic name, report data. So make sure to rename it so you don't lose it. The sheet itself will use the column labels from your report template and will give the sheet the same name as your report. The last tab on the output will show the debug output of your report. As mentioned earlier, the generated SQL here is what Evergreen uses to communicate to the database and get your data. It's pretty hard to read because the data fields have computer-generated names made of random letters and numbers. If something goes wrong and you find yourself submitting a reports-related help desk ticket, it's a good idea to attach the debug output. We can run this code manually to retrieve the data or see where the reporter crashed. The last thing you need to know about running reports is how to edit them once you've already kicked them off. Let's say that you've created a recurring billing report that goes out to your staff on a monthly basis. However, you've had a change up in staff and you need to remove one of the recipients from your email list. We can do this by modifying the report from the reports folder. Find your folder and then search for the report that you created. Then you can click Edit at the end of its row to start modifying it. From here, we can change the email recipients or the recurrence interval and then save the report again. The next time the report runs, it'll be sent to the new address. If you're done with a recurring report and no longer wish for it to run, you can delete it from your reports folder to shut it down completely. Keep in mind that this will also delete your report output, so make sure you have it backed up. And with that, we've covered how to run reports. In that chapter, we learned about filters, operators, and transforms. The most complicated topic we'll cover in today's training is the report template editor.
If you want to start creating templates from your own, you can. A lot of people never do that too much. They just go off of the shared ones that are in the folders, sometimes tweak those a little bit and say, hey, I want a report that does this. Can you make it happen?
Let's start with a simple example of a modification that you might want to make. Let's say that we'd like to make some changes to that template we were using in the previous chapter. Let's say we want to change the checkout date time to be date only. We want to show the ISBN attached to the bib record, and we want to add a filter on whether it was a renewal or not. The first thing to note here is that there's no real way to edit a template. Once a template has been created, it's immutable. The only way to edit a template is to clone it, add your changes, and save it with a new name. With that out of the way, let's start by locating that template again, checking its box and hitting Clone Selected Template. Just like before, choose the folder you'd like to create your template in. Now we're dropped right into the deep end. This is where the magic happens. So I'm going to focus in on what each part of the screen does, starting with the template name field. This is how your template will appear to you and anybody who shares the templates folder. Please be mindful of how your template's name looks and how it will affect the way people search. We like to keep the titles of our reports concise and accurate to the information that they retrieve. Every time you clone a template, it'll add the word clone to it. That means that if you clone that template again, it'll say clone, clone, and then clone, clone, clone. This is a personal preference, but I find templates named like this to be really confusing. So what I do is add a number to the end of a template while I'm working on it. So the first clone I make is 1.0, and then the next one is 1.1, 1.2. And then once I get past 9, I name it 1.10, 1.11. And then once I'm done, if I ever need to make edits to it again, I'll start from 2.0. So next you have the template description. And like the template name, you want to keep in mind how other users will be viewing your work. We suggest that you list every field that the output will display and how that data will be filtered. Below that is your core source. This is the primary source of data in your report. Any other sources of data that are used must be connected in some way to the core source of this template. For editing a report template, you should absolutely not change this. Next is nullability. Nullability is a really tricky subject, and it's one that we don't recommend you mess with if it can be avoided. This feature lets you configure how your core source is joined onto other sources of data in the database. You can consider it like another type of filter. Later in this training, we'll go into the specifics of what nullability does, but for now, this is all you need to know. Your core source contains links to other sources of data. Click on the triangle next to a source's name to expand it and see what pieces of data it links to. In this example, the user checkout history contains a link to the circulating item, the circulation, and the user. Below your core sources, you'll find the display fields and filters. Display fields tell you what's being displayed in the report and what transformation it's undergoing. The filters tell you how the report is going to discern what should and shouldn't show up in the output. The two tabs share some commonalities between them. The first column on both tabs, source path, will tell you where the data is being drawn from. As an example, you can see that in row 6, we're pulling the first name from the patron, and that's coming from the circulation, which is coming from the user checkout history. You can think about this source path like the path to a file on your computer. The data type will tell you whether the data is numeric, text, timestamp, Boolean, or link. Most of the data you're likely to see will be text and numbers. A Boolean is just a fancy way of saying true, false, and a link is a link to another data source. You're likely to only see links on org unit filters. The last field that these two things have in common is the field transform. We learned about these earlier. These are the transformations that Evergreen will make to the data before it makes it to your output. In the filters, we can see that checkout time has been transformed into a date, cutting off the hours, minutes, and seconds from the original timestamp. Next, let's go over the columns that differ between the display field and filters. On the display fields, the column label is what the name of the column will be in your output. This is something anyone who uses your report template will see, so make sure it's something easy for people to understand. It can get really ambiguous if a column label ends up being called barcode and you aren't sure whether it's referring to the patron barcode or the item barcode. Likewise, filters have a name column. However, for an unknown reason, this name can't be changed. In the operator column, you can refine your filters to get the data you want. In our example, the checkout time is using the between operator to filter on a date range and using the enlist operator to filter on a selection of org units. The final column on filters, the filter value, allows you to hard code a value into the filter. Leaving this blank will allow the user to fill it in. Now that we've gone over the basics, let's start going over how to make the changes we need to this report. Our first and most simple objective will be to change the checkout date time to be date only. To accomplish this goal, we'll use a field transform. First, find the checkout date time column from your display fields and right-click it to open up the drop-down menu. From that, we'll select Change Transform. Click the triangle to expand the drop-down. Here you can see all the transforms available for the timestamp field. The one that will remove the hour and minute is called Date. Select that one and hit OK. Now that you've changed the transform, we should do the responsible thing and update the column label as well. This way, people who use the template after us will know that this is only a date field. In your display fields, right-click the checkout date time and select Change Column Label from the pop-up. Delete the word time from your column header and hit OK. Now we're done with our first objective. It's super easy so far. Our second objective is to add a new display field to our report for the ISBN of the circulated material. This is much more complicated and will involve us digging deeply into the data linked to our core source. The first step is to expand the data connections of our core source. Click the triangle next to user checkout history to show all of the available connections. Next, we'll click on the circulating item connection. With circulating item selected, we'll see the center pane of the reporter light up with the display fields we can pull down. But I don't see ISBN on here. I don't see it anywhere except for a weird field called dummy ISBN, and that's not the right one. In our heads, we think about this type of information being associated with the item, along with the title, author, and genre. But in reality, all this information is attached to the bib record, not to the item itself. Think about it from the data perspective. If you have 10,000 copies of an item and they all have the same title, it wouldn't make sense to duplicate that title over and over and over when we can just link all these copies to one definitive source. The question is, how do we connect ourselves to that bib record? Take a look at this. In our display field, we're already showing the title and author. So how did the original creator of the template manage that? Try hovering your mouse over the source path and it'll tell us how they got the data we're looking for. It looks like it went through the checkout history, into the item, and then into the call number, then into the bib record before finally hitting something called the simple record extracts. It's up to us to recreate that source path by navigating to the correct data source from our core source. Back in our core sources, let's expand the circulating item by clicking on the triangle next to its name. There's a lot of stuff that it's linked to, but we only want the call number volume. Let's expand that one next. With call number and volume expanded, let's expand bib record next. The amount of stuff in here is a bit overwhelming. Don't let yourself get confused. We want to keep the path to the data the same as the title and author. That way we can keep our report as simple as possible. Remember that those were from a simple records extracts area. We'll have to scroll around to find it. Here we go. The simple records extract table is a special table. It only exists inside of the reporter. It provides you easy access to the most commonly sought after bibliographic information. Select ISBN from the list of fields and raw data from your transform. While in the Display Fields tab, click Add Fields to add the new display field to the list. If we're successful, we should see ISBN appear at the bottom of our display fields. Our third objective will be adding a filter on the Is Renewal field of the circulations. We'll set it up so that the output will only show us the circulations that are not renewals of previous circulations. To start setting up your filters, navigate over to the Filters tab at the bottom of the module. We want to filter on the field on the circulation, so let's join on the source circulation from our core source. On the circ, there are multiple true-false fields that indicate whether a circ was a renewal or not. We want to select auto renewal, desk renewal, OPAC renewal, and phone renewal. We can actually add multiple filters or display fields at a time by selecting them all at once from the center pane. Click Add Fields to add them to your template. The 4 new renewal fields have been added to our filters. The data type is bool, which is short for boolean, another way to say true-false value. For each of these fields, we want to add a filter value so that users of the template will not have to enter in the true-false values for themselves. Right-click the field and go to Change Filter Value. Select False to set that up. This will make it so it will filter out renewals from your report. Now you can see that the filter values for all 4 of your Is Renewal fields are set to false. We're almost ready to run our template, but first we need to clean up a few things. We need to update our template name and description so that people who use the template after us will know what's good. I changed the name to Non-Renewal Checkouts by Branch and Date Range, Patron Info. I also added the ISBN, checkout date, and Is Renewal filter to the description. Now we're ready to save the template. Let's give our template a run. Find it in your folder and select Create New Report from Selected Template. In our report setup, we can see our new display fields and filters. Nice. I've set up the report to run from 2020 to 2021 with all of BHM's branches. The report will take additional time to execute because of the additional fields that we've added. When we open up our report, we can see that we have too many rows for the reporter to generate a nice graph. We can see our data has come out nicely in the Excel output. I've redacted the patrons' names from this screenshot. It's important to keep in mind that report outputs will often contain personal, private information. It's up to staff to keep that data safe. This covers the most basic edits that you'll be making to templates. In the last chapter, we learned about core sources and display fields. We also expanded on filters, operators, and transforms. The last chapter of this training is about two advanced features of the reporter module that have given users in the past a lot of trouble. The first advanced topic we're going to cover in this training is nullability, which I briefly brought up earlier. Nullability might be the most perplexing feature in the entire reporter. It's essentially like a filter on the connection between two sources of data. There are three types of nullability: child, parent, and none. In the example from the last chapter, if you selected child nullable, the report will return checkouts whether they had a valid item or nothing at all. For instance, if it was completely deleted from the database. If you selected parent nullable, it'll return every item whether it was ever checked out or not. I don't find myself using this one. Lastly, non-nullable, the default, will only return checkouts if they have an item. If you choose to use nullability in your reports, be prepared for a lot of trial and error. The main reason I'm bringing up nullability is because of a huge caveat that comes with editing clones of existing reports. If a report was built with nullability, it has to be included again if you choose to make changes to it. Here's an example. In this template I made, I've included none nullability on the statcats. That means that only users who have statcat entries with them will be included in the report. If I now add another display field to statcat entries, but forget to include nullability, the reporter won't know what to do. Here's why. With my original field, I told the reporter that I want to include patrons who have statcats. But then with the new display field without nullability, we're telling the reporter that we're indifferent to whether the patron should have any statcat entries. Having two different source paths to the same data source will give the reporter a conniption because it won't be able to figure out how to connect the two pieces together. I'll show you how to fix that. Notice how the parentheses next to the source path says enter? That tells us that we need to use a non-nullable when we select the statcat entries. With nullability box checked, we can add our connection to the source with a correct nullability. Since our display field has the correct nullability now, the reporter won't have a meltdown trying to figure out what our intentions were. Here's a cheat sheet for how nullability and the text in the parenthesis are connected. The very last topic we're going to talk about is aggregation. Aggregation allows you to calculate a value from all the rows in a source of data. Here's a good example from a very simple report called Count Active Patrons Who Checked Out Within a Specified Date Range. Aggregations are created through field transforms. Here we selected the ID and used the count distinct transform to count the total number of unique users. At the bottom, you can see how that output looks in itself. Aggregations are kind of like nullability in that once it's turned on, you have to make sure to keep using it. In this scenario, if we tried to pull down another display field from ILS user, like first name, the reporter would think that we wanted to group all users by name. So let's see what that looks like. I added first name to the report template and made the transform uppercase so that the grouping will be case insensitive. Let's go ahead and check out the output. As you can see, the data is still aggregated, but now it's grouped by users who have the same first name. 110 people named William checked out material during this time frame. 102 people named James, etc. Let's combine nullability and aggregation to add a new display field to one of my templates. This is a very complicated template that I created called Users Near Expiration Date. It will return all of the users from a system who are 6 months away from expiring. Using nullability and aggregation, I want to add the user's last hold request date. The first thing we want to do is check the nullability box and open up a none-nullable connection to all hold requests. This means that we only want users who have made hold requests before. From the center pane, locate the request date/time field. The transform that we want to use is called max. This is an aggregator transform that will select the largest value from a set of data. In this case, the date farthest in the future will be the maximum date. Let's add the field and ensure that it has the right transform. Make sure to rename the column label so that it's legible to future users. In our output, we can see that the maximum, aka latest date, appears in our last request date time. In this final chapter, we learned about aggregation and nullability, and that covers all of the reporter vocabulary. If you're feeling particularly educated, give the reporter vocab crossword a try to hone your skills. I've included a link to a PDF so you can print it out. Congratulations, you're all now experts at using the reporter. Well, maybe not experts, but with this training, you've got a great set of tools in your belt to handle all sorts of reporter conundrums. And if you can't figure something out, you can always submit a ticket through our ticketing system and one of us will help you.